Hey everybody, Ken Kuhn, North Star Technology Group, and today we're going to be talking about why you need a cybersecurity risk assessment if you are a healthcare provider. And today I'm joined by one of our chief security officers, Dan DeFay. Many of you may know Dan. He is infamous in our industry. He is a bright, shining beacon of cybersecurity hope. Dan, want to say hello to the group?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Ken. Yeah, pleasure to be here. I love doing cybersecurity risk assessments for all types of organizations, and medical practices need it more than anybody. So looking forward to diving in here with you and checking this out.
Yeah. I threw in the chat a link. Obviously we'll be talking about a lot of different things, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity if they wanted to consult with us to kind of gauge where they may be in their cybersecurity risk management program or want some advice or recommendations. The link there will bring you to a screen where you can book some time with us. So I wanted to put that in there. But again, my name is Ken Kuhn. I'm the owner and founder of North Star Technology Group. We are a leading cybersecurity and IT managed services firm. We have customers all over the country. We partner with other MSPs. We partner with cybersecurity risk firms to help our healthcare customers protect their information and reputations. So why are you here? Well, I'm sure everybody kind of has their own reason. One of them could be you understand how important security is to healthcare organizations. There is a rise in threat landscape, cybersecurity risk, breaches. You see this all the time in the news, and you probably want to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. Maybe you already have an IT department. Maybe you have cyber liability insurance and are wondering, well, I already have this stuff taken care of. Why do I need to have a cybersecurity risk assessment? Maybe you're not sure if that's enough, and you want to make sure that you meet all of your HIPAA responsibilities. Or maybe you are like a lot of organizations that come and talk to us and they understand that they need all of this stuff, but they just simply have no idea where to start. So who are we and why can we even talk about this stuff? Well, like I said, we're North Star Technology Group. We have done cybersecurity risk assessments for healthcare customers through us and our partners in upwards of 31 different states. Dan DeFay, who again is joining us today, and I co-authored a book on cyber attack prevention. It's helping in a co-managed IT environment organizations to help manage their cybersecurity. And specifically, the chapter that I wrote was about HIPAA compliance. We are the face of cybersecurity in Fargo Inc. magazine for regional customers. That's North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota. We are the face for cybersecurity. So between Amber and I, we write a column every single month talking about this topic, and it's ranging from all kinds of things from artificial intelligence to business continuity to anything related to cybersecurity. We have a lot of people. What are we up to now? 32, 33 employees now, Dan? And we've got a lot of talented technical people in many, many, many different states. I think we're up to 3 CISSPs now. For those of you that know, that's a pretty highly sought after cybersecurity certification. And I don't know why I have 100, that's 200 plus, probably 250 businesses in the United States. So what do you hope to maybe get from this? Obviously, we want to make sure this is valuable for you. So we want to make sure you understand what a cybersecurity risk assessment actually is, why you may need one, and why it's important to get it done now. Want to talk about how much time it takes, what to expect during that process. And then finally, really, what is the very next step, right, to get your business covered and to mitigate cyber risk? So again, continuing why you should listen to us. I'm a big believer, right, in telling stories, right, and in visualizing and being able to help customers and prospects understand the type organizations that we work with, right? And of course, right now, cyber attacks are happening every single day. If you pay attention at all to the news, right? There's another data breach, there's another ransomware attack, there's another organization, healthcare provider, hospital, nursing home, long-term care organization that's hit by some sort of cyber breach. About a year ago, actually, to Halloween weekend, I got a call. I was in Arizona. I was at the Arizona State Fair, and I got a call from our on-call network engineer that a organization in the state of North Dakota, a critical access hospital with 140 employees in the state of North Dakota, was going through an active cybersecurity breach. What had happened is they had a business partner that was hosting their email. They had a secure connection from that hosted email server into the private network of this hospital, of which they were hosting their electronic medical record system. The bad guys attacked that email server because it wasn't patched, traversed into the network, and detonated ransomware on all of the workstations. Long story short, a complete recovery was required. 6 weeks of hard effort, right, to be able to bring this organization back. And, obviously the saving grace in this case happened to be a solid incident response process that was led by their cyber liability insurance provider, a solid business continuity plan that was led by the backup and disaster recovery system, and then of course just a lot of work. Side note: the CEO got COVID, the director of IT got COVID. There was a blizzard in the state of North Dakota. We tried to send a recovery team to help rebuild all those machines that were coming from Arizona. They got stuck. It was an absolute disaster. We don't want that to happen to you, right, Dan?
That is right. We've seen too many of these things happen, and it can happen to pretty much anybody, and it's even worse when you're not prepared.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about what role cyber liability insurance has in this process, whether it's preventative or reactive. But it's just something we just don't want to have happen to you guys. So how do we facilitate making sure that doesn't? Well, obviously we care very deeply about this, as a mission. We staff people that are educated in this particular area of risk management, training. We go to conferences, we get certifications. We essentially become a true part or extension of IT, but not only of IT, right, but of those businesses themselves. So what is a cybersecurity risk assessment? And I kind of want Dan to talk a little bit, because as we've been doing some of these together, I feel Dan does a fantastic job, right, with his customers. And I'll ask Dan to maybe add to this, right? But obviously the biggest goal to have a cybersecurity risk assessment is to help and identify risk, right? So that example that I just gave about the hospital that had the huge ransomware detonation, a cybersecurity risk assessment probably would have uncovered a few things. One, that they had an unpatched email server, right? Two, that partner that was hosting that server, the hospital didn't have a lot of visibility into that third-party vendor risk management, right? They didn't know what risks that partner might have bringing into the environment. Maybe it would have identified things that they're doing well. They've had cyber liability insurance, right? That cyber liability insurance was a good partner in developing incident response and handling the forensics, right? But essentially, we're just trying to identify what risks are there. And then, of course, being able to then figure out how to mitigate those risks, protect those assets. Obviously, cybersecurity risk and any of these incidents can have serious major consequences. I mean, to be completely honest, I'm very, very pleasantly surprised that this hospital didn't actually close its doors. There's another organization that we were aware of that was part of a cybersecurity breach in the state of Illinois. They were a large hospital that went through a very, very similar attack. They did not survive it financially. They actually had to shut their doors, right? So the idea of a cybersecurity risk assessment is identify those risks, mitigate them so that doesn't happen. For healthcare providers like you guys, compliance is important. So we have to manage and deal with HIPAA. For other industries, it could be FTC safeguards, right? For other financial institutions, it could be PCI DSS if you are managing or holding credit card information. But at the end of the day, of course, you want to avoid those audits, you want to avoid those fines. And ultimately, people don't look at it this way, right? But having a well-done cybersecurity risk assessment with a really well-done mitigation plan will actually help you save money, right? And actually improve efficiencies, right? Because the process, right, of having a cybersecurity risk assessment, you identify how you manage process workflows and how you protect those. And it's not uncommon, right, where we've helped an organization actually save money by introducing efficiencies. Dan, do you want to add anything to what a cybersecurity risk assessment is?
Yeah, I think one of the best things about having one is that you know, a lot of people think that, oh, you know, I have cyber insurance or I have these other things, you know, in place, and those are things that you can see, right? You can see you have the policy, you can see all these other things, but the cybersecurity risk assessment really helps bring to light all the things that you can't see. All of the weaknesses, you know, and in a lot of cases, there could already be an attacker that has a foothold inside your network, and you don't even know it. So, and I was sharing kind of what our best practices are with Ken. You know, anytime that we bring on a customer, we always do a risk assessment because we absolutely have to know if there's an attacker inside their network before we start supporting them.
Absolutely, good point. So essentially, and we'll talk a little bit more, Dan, about this, and I want to hear your input as well on this. You know, we kind of focus on 4 major components to the framework of doing a cybersecurity risk assessment, and that allows us to create maybe a little structure, right, around assessing risk. And you know, in not any particular order, except I would say probably protecting the people is probably at the top of that list, because I'm sure you can agree, right, that ultimately the highest attack vector, the most popular attack vector still is human decisions, right? Whether it's clicking on something, opening something, going somewhere, right, that they shouldn't. And so we focus a big part of our assessment on how do we manage the risk to the employees. Process is important too, right? And I'll talk a little bit of an example of this in a bit, but obviously every one of you in your business has certain standard operating procedures. You have process that you do for certain portions of your job. And often those involve some form of technology, and all of them, of course, that involve technology has a requirement to make sure that process is protected when information goes from one place to another. And a great example that might be email, or it could be you know, an ACH transfer for funds from your checking account to somebody else. We want to make sure that those processes are protected. Technology, of course, is the core of this. We want to make sure that we help manage that all of the technology that you use, the electronic submission of information, electronic use of information is protected. And that could be your electronic medical record system. Again, it could be things like email, it could be just storing data files. And then finally, of course, the data, which ultimately is the lifeline of your organization. Hackers these days are getting more and more evil, I guess. And they are attacking the data, and they are obviously wanting to steal your data. They want to use your data for you know, bad intent. Dan, anything to add at all to the framework?
Yeah, I just kind of want to also just highlight the part about protecting people. We recently had a law firm that we were protecting, and their opposing counsel had their email hacked. And the opposing counsel's email, you know, basically the bad actor had gotten in there and was sending wire instructions to our client, saying, you know, you need to wire this settlement money to this account. And the firm we were protecting actually went ahead and wired those funds because they did not have the right process in place to actually validate that they needed to make that payment. We actually had flagged the email. There was a big banner going across the email saying, hey, this looks very suspicious, be very careful. But the employee ignored the banner and went ahead and said, gave authorization to wire the funds. Whereas if they would have taken the time to set up a better process to where they actually had to maybe contact the other party by phone, that could have eliminated it. So it always usually falls down to the people having some kind of a failure on their part. Even though it's not their fault, it's that you have to always train them, for the worst.
Absolutely. Yeah, to your point, a big chunk, right, of cybersecurity breaches are due to that human element. We worked with an engineering company that it's to Dan's example, right? And we could go on and on. We have so many examples of this, of organizations that have either lacked process, dual controls, or the training for people to recognize when something bad is happening to them. But we had an engineering company that had a business email compromise. The threat actors, the bad guys were sending emails to the accountant, the bookkeeper, and telling, basically impersonating the owner and telling this bookkeeper that she needed to write out a bunch of checks, right, to somebody. And she did it, and it was not a small amount. There were 2 checks that she wrote for over $150,000 each. So the total loss from this incident was over $300,000. And she wrote those checks out, right? And essentially, they never got their money back. We helped, cooperate with the FBI in that process, but often that money is gone, right? So as part of the cybersecurity risk assessment, one of the things that we evaluate is your process and your protection of the people. In this example, she was solely authorized to write as big a check as she could, right? That's an item that would have been flagged or recognized. She didn't not have cybersecurity awareness training, right? And so she may not be skeptical or critical, right, of these requests. We subsequently actually went in and did a cybersecurity risk assessment. And the irony is we did a phishing test, right, where we went out and we sent emails to their staff, basically pretending to be a bad guy, right, to see how did they respond to that. And we're talking 2 weeks after they had this incident, we had 2 people not only click the email, not only open the email, but they actually submitted credentials to our phishing test.
Wow.
So the people side is just absolutely critical to make sure that that they are trained and they understand how to recognize risk. Dan kind of used an example of wire fraud, right? So even protecting the process. So there's a fine line, right? Maybe even overlap between process and people. We had a mortgage company that had a similar incident, Dan, where they had a gal that had fraudulent wire instructions emailed to her as part of some sort of business email compromise. So she got bad instructions. She wired like $110,000 to what she thought was her escrow company, and it was really the bad guys, right? And so I'm sure if you guys have gone through any type of loan process, the good banks, of course, are hyper vigilant on making sure that one step doesn't get intercepted, right? But that process of getting money from here to here needs to be protected. And I'm sure you guys can think in your healthcare practice, many of these processes that could be risky, right? And those are the things that we want to take a look at.
Yep.
Technology, we talked about the third piece of the framework. I gave you an example of 2 hospitals that had a data breach that resulted in some bad stuff happening. One was fortunate and stayed open, but the other one closed, right? A big chunk of organizations that have these data breaches do close because it is so expensive, right, to recover. And we worked with a regional cloud provider. They had data centers in Baltimore, Maryland, and Dallas, Texas. They had basically a vulnerable server that was exposed to the internet that was compromised by a bad guy. That bad guy went in there and essentially was on the network. We call that dwell time, from when they get onto the network, right before they do anything. Was on the network for like 45 to 60 days and kind of basically casing the joint, right? Checking, excuse me, checking to see one of these deals with my throat. Checking to see, right, if there are any vulnerabilities that they could exploit. They traversed the network. They detonated ransomware on customer servers that were hosted, and worst case in that scenario is they were able to get access to the data backups. So they actually detonated ransomware in the backups. And so this cloud provider, their only choice, right, was to pay the ransom. And of course, I'm sure, Dan, you have opinion on this, about how, risky it is, right, to pay the ransom. Number one, you never know if you're going to get your data back anyway.
Right.
But they had no choice, right? So they went through this process, and we've actually done a presentation, and I've talked about just this case study, right? Because it was so fascinating, because we ended up having to work with the FBI. We worked with an organization called Coveware that all they do is they negotiate ransom payments with hackers and then work towards doing a Bitcoin transfer, right, to get decryptor keys. Like, it's right out of the movies, But the point is here, of course, is protecting your technology. In this case, we had an exposed server that was vulnerable, and so reviewing that environment to make sure that that's not the case in your business. And finally, of course, protecting the data. Obviously, the attendees today are primarily in the healthcare space, right, which is a big part of the organizations that we help protect. We worked with an organization, they were a hospital that had a data breach, and they ended up having to report this. It was a reportable incident to Health and Human Service Office of Civil Rights, right, as part of a HIPAA breach. And we actually had assisted them with their audit, which is something I would never want any of you guys to have to go through. Nobody likes audits. Just the word audit, I think, it elicits some sort of feeling, right, in most people, and especially when it's something like this that is a serious of protecting people's health information. But the truth is if this happens, and you have, depending on your state's notification, your breach notification laws in your area, you may have to actually report these data breaches. And so when that happens, we want to make sure that we are prepared, right, by building what we call a book of evidence, right, that we are doing everything we can in our power to meet our compliance responsibilities, because that's what the auditors are going to look for at the end of the day, and help determine whether or not you're going to have to pay a fine.
That's right.
Dan, you want to kind of talk through how long it typically takes for you to go through a cybersecurity risk assessment? Usually we kind of have like an intro, we have a Q&A process, you do your technical stuff, right? You present, but you want to step through kind of how that process works and how involved it is.
Sure, yeah. So whenever we do a risk assessment, depending on the size of the organization, it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. What we usually do, we start things off by, going through and really learning about your business, learning about the data flow, learning about, what it is that you're really trying to protect, and really what you currently have in place. And so the other thing that we like to do is we like to do a risk assessment from the vantage point of an attacker. So we'll actually put ourselves in the shoes of the attacker and go through and try different types of attacks on your current cyber posture and see what's effective. And most of the time what we find is that things are not effective, right? That we're actually able to attack and get into the network several different ways. And so once we've gathered all of these findings, we'll have a presentation, with usually the owner of the company or whoever is managing the operations, and we'll go through those findings, and we'll come up with a plan to have just ongoing cybersecurity good practices in place, so that going forward you won't have any kind of unprepared event that takes place. So that's really our goal, is to see where you are, figure out where the security gaps are, fill those gaps, and make sure that you've got the book of evidence that Ken talked about, and that you actually have things in place to prevent you from having a serious event. Because the bottom line is, you can have cyber insurance, you can have all these other things, but if you don't have good controls and good cybersecurity services and processes in place, you could really be looking at a very expensive and catastrophic event hitting your medical practice.
And it's almost like you've seen this presentation before, Dan, because the most common response we do get is around cyber liability insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have insurance, right? Why do I need all this stuff? Insurance will just make me whole.
Yeah, and then the thing is, insurance doesn't really do anything to turn the clock back and get you back to where you can work. All the insurance really does is provide some financial assistance. It's very helpful for if the breach is bad enough that other, let's say your clients or other third parties were affected because of the breach in your system. The cyber insurance is good to help cover some of the lawsuits that are going to be coming, but it doesn't really do a whole lot, to make you to get you back to where you were prior to the attack. You really need to have other things in place along with the cyber insurance.
Yeah. And we actually do a completely separate session just on cyber liability insurance and how to best work with a cyber liability insurance broker and underwriter. Because I'm sure many of you guys that have insurance are filling out renewals or brand new applications for the first time. And obviously we notice this, but over time, these applications are becoming bigger and bigger and more complicated. And the reason is, of course, is insurance companies don't want to be banks for these losses anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you fill these out, right, like it is absolutely critical to be 100% truthful, right? Are you doing the thing that they're asking, or are you not?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've done a presentation just on HIPAA breaches, and when it comes to cyber insurance, insurance companies will, especially if the payout is large enough, they'll come back and investigate the event, right? And
yeah, they'll do a forensic investigation.
They will determine, were you lying on your application, and if you were lying, they're gonna get their money back, right?
Yep.
So, part of the process of the cybersecurity risk assessment is to identify what those items are that are most commonly needed by cyber insurance, right? To make it easy to get applications approved, make it easy to get renewals approved, and make it easy to get reimbursements approved, right? But Dan, what if they have an IT department, right? I mean, they must be covered. You got an IT guy, right?
Yeah, you and I both wrote a book about this. Unfortunately, the IT department, in most cases, they're not as trained up on what's really necessary to prevent a cyber attack. When I talk to most IT departments, when it comes to the extent of their cybersecurity prevention, I usually hear the words antivirus and firewall. And that's pretty much the extent of it. And if in today's age, if all you have is antivirus and a firewall, and that's what you're managing to protect your business, there's going to be a lot of gaps. And really the cybersecurity risk assessment, we can show you just how easily, the firewall and the antivirus can be, duped into letting things in. And it's just, It's just at the point now, and it's not really the IT department's fault. It's just that, things have just rapidly changed. The IT department is really there to try and make sure that things aren't down. That when you turn your computer on, things are working, you're getting access to the information you need. They're thinking more on offense, right? And really, you've got to have kind of that defensive coordinator, if you will, in football terms, to make sure that you're constantly limiting the access where it needs to be, and the exposure, to hackers.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? Well, obviously you have a couple different choices. Certainly, this was a very generic overview, and anybody could go out and try to piece this together themselves, right? You have an IT team, maybe you don't, right? You can try to build this and do this yourself. Or you could partner with an organization, right, that does this day in and day out, right? And honestly, and I think Dan can support this, the reason why we're even on this call is this is a passion of ours, right? Like, we literally live this, maybe eat, drink, and breathe this every day. I don't know about dreaming about cybersecurity, but
I do have dreams about it too. Yes.
So
yeah, and not only that, but I mean, an IT department. I mean, let's say you fork out the money to hire one cybersecurity professional. That one professional is really going to be limited. They're not going to be a 24/7 team that's ready to respond right away. They're not going to be a security operations center that's looking at all the anomalies going on and flagging things and bringing all these things to your attention, to investigate. So, really, unless you have a really big company that can really build out a cybersecurity team, you're usually better off partnering with somebody like North Star that has a team in place that's 24/7, ready to respond and investigate every single thing that comes across our plate.
Yeah. So obviously I couldn't agree more, but if this is something that you guys are interested in, I did put in the chat a link to our cyber strategy booking page, and honestly, like, this is a no pressure conversation. I Dan and I do these calls every single day, and many times it's just talking through what organizations are doing regarding their risk management strategies, and sometimes people just want a little bit of reassurance that they're going the right direction. So if you're at all interested, you want to talk, no obligation, hit that link and book some time, and we'll work through and understand a little bit of your risk and maybe help you put a plan in place to reduce it. So Dan, any final comments, or we can go to questions if there are any in the group.
Thanks for going over that, Ken. I just can't emphasize enough how important the risk assessment is, because it's really the starting point. It's really the first chapter in your journey to getting secure and making sure that you don't lose everything that you've worked hard to grow. So the risk assessment is really the key to get started. You've got to kind of know where you're going, and the risk assessment lets you know right where you are and what needs to get cleaned up going forward.
So we do have a question. Who from my team should be involved in creating the incident response plans, or even starting an assessment? Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say whoever is most involved in the day-to-day IT, from a tactical standpoint, that's usually who we work with. There's going to be kind of more people that are thinking strategically on your team, and there's going to be also the ones that are really dealing with the day-to-day. So obviously we're going to be interviewing both types of people in the company, but definitely whoever is most involved in the day-to-day IT is somebody we're going to be wanting to work hand in hand with doing the risk assessment.
Yeah, and I think, in addition to that, you talk about interviewing, these are conversations that we have about workflow and how you use information. So, department leads, obviously, I think senior leadership, because at the end of the day, senior leaders drive change, right, and improvement in the organization. So it's important that this whole process starts, with the owner, the CEO, the administrator of the organization, because they will set the tone and demonstrate, right, to everybody else that this is an important initiative to their organization.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any other questions? This will be recorded. This is recorded. So we will be sending this out to attendees. So we got one more question. Can an organization start an assessment in the middle of an audit? I guess it depends on who the audit is from, but in the example that I gave you, where we had to do where we assisted an organization with their HHS audit, I think that an assessment can and should be done whenever you're ready for it, right? Obviously, an audit's gonna try to do a point in time assessment of where you are, but the fact that you're moving forward, right, with a positive step, right, to identifying your risk is, I think is valuable. I can imagine that HHS would be mad or upset. Hey, you're actually taking this seriously, and we're gonna have an experienced cybersecurity firm come and evaluate because we had some sort of event. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, really the time to do it is as soon as possible.
Yeah.
We really don't we don't impact any of the day-to-day operations. The only thing we do is we establish the amount of access that we need so that we can start investigating the environment and just seeing if there's anything out of the ordinary. And the sooner we can get in there and start looking at that, the better.
Another question is, how do we get started on employee training? My first stab at that, of course, part of our standard I guess offering that we have when we go through a cybersecurity risk assessment is we include a cybersecurity awareness training platform. And what that involves is, depending on the tolerance for this type of task, right? Nobody wants to take more training than they need to. We try to make it simple, fun, and easy, but we include that as part of our service. And I think I subscribe, and Dan may agree or disagree, right? Like, walk before you run, right? So a lot of the organizations that first start doing training, it's simple, it's quick, it's easy, right? Like, it's better to have some overview of identifying risk, than going into deep, involved, right, stuff. But Dan, I don't know if you have any input on security awareness training, but it's important and absolutely necessary, especially for HIPAA compliance, that you have this program in place.
Yeah, I mean, really, the most important thing is that it gets done in a way that doesn't really impact, productivity. And there's a lot of different ways that we do this. I mean, especially, anytime that somebody does something wrong, like maybe they click on a link they shouldn't have clicked on, we do have services in place that are going to point that out to them and say, hey, you shouldn't have clicked on this or whatever. And anytime you can take that incident and make it a teaching moment,
yes,
it's usually very helpful.
Yeah. And I come back to that example of the engineering firm, right, that went through the process of having that business email compromise, where the bookkeeper ended up writing $300,000 worth of checks, and then immediately after the phishing test showed people were still clicking and submitting credentials, right? So you see the critical importance, right, of educating your team to recognize risky behavior, right, when it comes to cyber. And so a good cybersecurity awareness training program is just so important.
Absolutely.
Dan, any final thoughts?
I think that now, especially with the year coming to an end, this is usually one of the best times to get started on a risk assessment. Usually, there's a lot of gearing up for the next year, and I know a lot of business owners and other people that are running medical practices are thinking about the revenue that they're going to be making next year. But I really encourage you to get a risk assessment done so you can make sure you're protecting everything that you're working on, and that something bad doesn't happen when you least expect it.
Yeah, and to that point, like I said, the link to booking a strategy session is in the chat. Highly encourage you, if you have any interest to talk more about this, that you do that. If there are no other questions, I will gladly give you back 14 minutes of your afternoon. And again, I appreciate everyone's participation. This is the first step, right? Getting and educating yourself on what this is involved and why it's important. So please, everybody, have a great day, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken.